My daughter-in-law called me a waste of space. She turned pale when she heard who I spoke to next. I turned 76 on a cold Sunday afternoon, though no one in that room seemed to care how long a life I had lived before stepping through the front door of my son's house. Patrick had insisted on hosting a small gathering. He said it would be family only, and I had held on to that word as if it were a promise worth something. But when I entered the living room, decorated with cheap streamers and a cake so small it looked embarrassed to call itself a cake, I knew immediately that it was not a celebration. It was an ambush, wrapped in pastel ribbons. Marissa stood in the center of the room, wearing a smile so wide it could have cut glass. She held a wine glass lifted high, her red nails glinting in the light. The Keaton relatives, her sisters, an aunt, 2 cousins, watched her with a kind of obedient stillness, waiting for whatever performance she had planned. Patrick lingered behind them, rubbing the back of his neck the way he did whenever he was about to disappoint me. "Everyone," Marissa called out, her voice bright and cruel all at once. "Let us raise a glass to the oldest decoration in this house." She turned to me, and the room turned with her. "To Agatha, our useless antique, standing exactly where she belongs." A few people laughed. Not loud, but loud enough that the sound reached me like a tap of a hammer on a bruise. Patrick did not laugh. He did not defend me either. His eyes moved away from mine, and that avoidance hurt more than the words themselves. I kept my hands folded in front of me. The ache in my wrists had grown worse these past months, but I did not want these people to see even a flicker of weakness. Clark, my late husband, used to tell me that my strength was quiet but steady. "Patrick will take care of you if anything ever happens to me," he told me the night before his last hospital stay. I had believed him with all my heart. The memory pressed against me now with the weight of a broken promise. Marissa continued her spectacle. "She spilled milk on the carpet again this morning," she announced, as if reporting a crime. "I swear the house smells like an old storage unit, and I have no idea what she touches to make the appliances go crazy. The dishwasher? Destroyed. The laundry room? A disaster. But she stands there, acting innocent, like a stray someone dragged in." The room murmured. Someone shifted uncomfortably, but still no one spoke for me. I opened my mouth to respond something gentle, something dignified, but the words caught in my throat as if even they had decided it was pointless. "If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening." Marissa set her wine glass down and strolled toward the dining table where the tiny birthday cake waited. It was a single-layer sponge, the kind sold in grocery stores when the bakery runs out of anything worth buying. She slid it closer to the edge, turned back toward me, and smiled with the slow satisfaction of someone about to do something she had been rehearsing. "This," she said, tapping the cake with a manicured finger, "is the perfect cake for a woman who gives nothing, needs everything, and refuses to fade away." And then, with a swift flick of her hand, she knocked it to the floor. The frosting smeared across the hardwood in a pale, defeated shape. A perfect metaphor for how she saw me, small, cheap, and undeserving of even the simplest kindness. A few gasps sounded. One of her cousins whispered, "Marissa," but she raised a finger to silence him. "Do not start," she snapped. Someone had to say it. "She lives here without contributing a cent. She just breathes and breaks things. Do not let that cane fool you. She milks every ounce of pity she can get." Patrick finally stepped forward, but instead of confronting his wife, he stared at the ruined cake as if hoping it would speak for him. He looked like a frightened boy, not a grown man. A man who once promised his father he would look after me. A man who now could not lift his head. My chest tightened, not from age but disappointment. If the people who should defend you turn away, then the world becomes colder than any winter. Someone handed me a napkin, as if I might pick the cake up off the floor with it. I let the napkin fall to my side. I looked at each face, some embarrassed, some entertained, some indifferent, and finally settled my eyes on Marissa. She folded her arms with a victorious tilt to her chin. "You see," she said lightly. "She will not even clean up her own mess." I straightened my back, though it hurt. I steadied my breath. I pressed my palm to my chest to calm the tremor beneath my ribs. I did not cry. I would not give her that pleasure. I have no tears left to waste, I said softly, but every person in that room heard it. When people look at cruelty, they often assume it was born in a single moment, like a match struck in the dark. But cruelty is rarely that simple. It is built slowly, carved into a person by the very hands that were supposed to shape them into something gentler. I understood that long before Marissa Keaton joined my family, long before I knew her name or the sharpness of her voice, long before she stood in my living room calling me useless. I knew cruelty has roots. Hers reached far back. Marissa grew up in a neighborhood everyone in town whispered about, but no one cared enough to help. She told me that only once, years ago, in a rare moment when she thought vulnerability would earn her sympathy. She said the walls of her childhood home were thin enough to hear every argument, every bottle hitting the floor, every night her father stumbled in too drunk to remember she existed. The neighbors mocked her clothes. Teachers rolled their eyes when she asked for help. And when she was 11, her mother packed a single suitcase, kissed her on the forehead, and left with a man who promised luxury and stability. She did not even look back at the doorway. I can imagine what that does to a girl. It twists something inside her, makes her believe affection is conditional and weakness is deadly. But instead of rising out of that pain with compassion, Marissa learned to hate anything that reminded her of helplessness. She believed strength came from stepping on whatever was softer than herself. When Patrick told her, in those early years of their relationship, that I was gentle and a little too soft-hearted, I could almost hear the click of a lock inside her, sealing me in as the perfect target for the bitterness she had never confronted. Yet my story did not start with her bitterness. My wounds came from a different time, a different loss. My closest friend, Delilah Vance, walked beside me through my young marriage, the births of my children, the early struggles of adulthood. She was the kind of friend who remembered your favorite tea without asking and held your shoulder during funerals without speaking. But life is merciless in its choices. Delilah fell ill just after her daughter turned 8. Cancer stole the color from her cheeks and then the days from her life. When Delilah whispered her final hope to me, her voice was so faint I had to bend close to hear it. "Do not let them split her up, Aggie," she said, her hand trembling in mine. "Promise me she will not be alone." I promised. I promised with every part of me. After she passed, I brought the idea of taking her daughter, young Elodie Mercer, into our home. I had already pictured her room, the gentle routines, the way her laughter might fill the small spaces left empty by grief. But when I approached my husband, Clark, and my son, Patrick, both men I loved deeply, they looked at me as if I had proposed bringing home a stranger from the street. "We cannot raise someone else's child," Clark said, his voice firm. "Our life is already complicated enough." Patrick nodded in agreement, though he was an adult by then and capable of his own choices. "Mom, this is not sensible. She is not family." Family. The words stung more than they intended. Family was supposed to be defined by love, not blood. But I swallowed my hurt and said nothing. I did not have the power to fight them. I only had the ability to help in silence. So I did. I found a discreet way to send money every month to support Elodie. I called the school to check on her progress. When she was older, I funded her scholarships anonymously. She grew into a brilliant girl, resilient and warm in all the ways the world had tried to break. She believed the money came from a charity that supported children who had lost their parents. She never knew the truth, at least not then. And maybe this is where the irony begins. Because years later, when Marissa applied for a nursing position at a hospital wing partly funded by that same charity, she was rejected due to her poor conduct during training. She never knew the funding trail, never knew the charity had been created by me long ago in Delilah's memory. All Marissa knew was that she had been denied, once again, by something she perceived as softness, as charity, as weakness. If she had ever discovered the connection, her resentment would have been volcanic. That is why Marissa hated me more deeply than she hated others. I represented everything she despised. I reminded her of her mother's abandonment, of poverty, of helplessness she would rather choke on than acknowledge. And when she stepped into my home, she found Patrick's words too easy to weaponize. "My mother is gentle," he had said. "She sees the good in everyone." To Marissa, that translated to, "My mother is prey." One winter evening, after another long day of unspoken slights, I sat in the dim kitchen holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Patrick walked in, his shoulders hunched, a tension in his jaw that told me he did not want to be there. I lifted my eyes to him and finally asked the question that had been pressing against my ribs for months. "What did I do wrong, Patrick? Tell me what mistake I made." He looked at the floor. He looked at the counter. He looked everywhere but at me. "I just want peace, Mom," he said. "Marissa gets upset easily. I cannot keep choosing sides." His voice was thin and wavering, but it held a truth he could not hide. The peace he wanted came at my expense. That was the moment I realized something I never wanted to admit. Silence is not always neutral. Sometimes silence stands shoulder to shoulder with cruelty. And my own son had chosen to stand there. Cruelty does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it comes in the smallest acts, the ones that seem harmless, until you step back and see the pattern for what it truly is, a slow, deliberate erasure. Marissa understood that kind of cruelty better than anyone I had ever met. She knew how to chip away at a person without leaving a single visible bruise. It began with little things. One morning I reached for the refrigerator handle and found it locked with a tiny silver padlock, the kind used to secure gym lockers. I thought perhaps Patrick had done it accidentally because he had been distracted lately, working longer hours and barely speaking to either of us. But then Marissa walked in, sipping her iced coffee with the arrogance of someone who believed the whole house existed to please her. "Oh," she said innocently. "Did you need something, Agatha? We keep it locked now. You tend to forget how much groceries cost. We cannot afford random snacking." Random snacking. I could hardly eat a full meal some days, let alone rummage through the fridge like a teenager. I wanted to remind her that I provided my own groceries for most of my life, but the words dried up before they reached my tongue. She had a way of making everything I said sound like a burden. 2 days later, I went to take my morning pills and found the bottle missing from its usual place. I searched the drawer, then the small basket on my nightstand, then the cupboard in the bathroom. My heart began to thump faster, not in panic, but in a familiar, unwelcome rhythm that warned me my body was not as forgiving as it used to be. I walked carefully down the hall and found Marissa in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. "Have you seen my medication?" I asked. She lifted her eyes and smiled as if she had been waiting for that moment. "You should keep better track of your things, Agatha. Old age is probably making you forgetful." My medication appeared on the counter later that afternoon, placed exactly where it had never been before. No explanation, no apology. That was when the fear started to settle into my bones, quiet and cold. The next cruelty came like an insult dressed as a chore. I returned to my room one evening to find my bed covered with a pile of clothes that did not belong to me. Dirty gym clothes, towels with streaks of makeup, shirts that smelled of perfume and sweat. I stood there, staring at the heap, wondering how long it would take for the humiliation to wash off. When I confronted Marissa, she laughed. "I need somewhere to put the laundry while I sort things out," she said. "That room of yours is just sitting there. Might as well use it for something productive." My room, the one space where I should have felt safe. She had turned it into a storage corner without hesitation. Then came the cold. Winter crept into the house early that year, bringing a sharpness to the air that settled into the floorboards. I woke one night with my teeth chattering uncontrollably. When I reached for the thermostat on the wall outside my room, I found it switched off, completely off. I wrapped myself in my thin blanket and tried to calm my breathing, but the ache in my chest grew with every shiver. The next morning, I asked Patrick if he had adjusted it. "No," he said absently. "Maybe the system glitched. I will look later." But he never looked. And the next night, the heater shut off again. I began to understand. It was not malfunctioning. Nothing in that house malfunctioned unless Marissa wanted it to. One afternoon, as I made my way down the stairs to answer the doorbell, my foot landed on something soft and wet. A towel. A damp towel placed exactly where my heel would fall. I grabbed the banister just in time to stop myself from tumbling forward. My heart pounded so violently that I had to sit halfway down the stairs to steady myself. When I looked up, Marissa was at the bottom, a dishcloth in her hand, her eyebrow lifted in mock confusion. "You should really pick up after yourself," she said. "Leaving things around like this is dangerous." Dangerous. The word lingered between us like a secret we had not agreed to share. I knew she had put it there. She knew I knew. But she also knew I would never be able to prove it. The final blow came in the form of her voice, amplified through her phone. One evening, when the house had grown quiet and the hallway lights were dimmed, I heard laughter coming from the living room. Not the joyful kind, but the kind that strips dignity from anyone caught in its path. I leaned closer to the doorway and saw Marissa holding her phone high as she live-streamed to a group of friends. "Look at what I have to live with," she said, angling the camera around the room before landing it on the hallway where she knew I might appear. "A living burden, a relic, a piece of trash I have to keep breathing and fed." Her friends laughed loudly enough for me to hear each voice, each cruel echo. "Can you believe this? I swear she drains the soul out of this house." I froze behind the wall, the chill returning to my chest. It felt as though someone had tied a rope around my heart and pulled tight. Not because of her words I had survived far worse, but because I realized there was no line she would not cross. And because deep down, a part of me feared what would happen if I continued to stay where I was, no longer seen as human. When the live stream finally ended, I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, holding onto the wallpaper as if it could steady the grief inside me. I reached into my pocket for the small, battered flip phone I kept for emergencies. The buttons were worn, the screen scratched, but it worked. My thumb hovered for only a second before I pressed the contact saved years ago under a name I had never dared to use unless absolutely necessary. Elodie Mercer, emergency. Then I hit call. I had been moving slowly that morning, slower than usual, because the ache beneath my ribs had not eased since the night before. My hands were stiff, my breath thin, and I could feel a faint tremor in my fingers that told me I needed rest. But rest was not something Marissa allowed me. Not in her house, not in her world. She stormed into my room without knocking, holding a pile of laundry in her arms. The clothes were damp, heavy, and sour with the smell of sweat and fabric left too long in the washer. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what she was doing, she hurled the entire pile at my chest. The wet fabric slapped against my skin and fell over my shoulders, my lap, the floor. I staggered back, grabbing the edge of the dresser to steady myself. "Do you see this?" she shouted, her voice trembling with fury she did not bother to hide. "This is what I have to deal with every single day. Your filth, your clutter, your uselessness." Her face flushed red, her eyes bright with something burning and unstable. "You are a burden, Agatha, a dead weight, a corpse that refuses to lie down." I stood there, trembling, the damp clothes clinging to my arms like the hands of ghosts. I wished, for a brief moment, that Patrick would appear, would step between us, would remind her that I was his mother. But the hallway stayed silent. Marissa was not finished. "You know what would make our lives easier?" she said, stepping closer, her breath sharp and heated against my cheek. "If you finally died, that is what. If you just stopped breathing, we could all start living." The word struck deeper than any shove or slap. I felt something inside my chest tighten, then twist sharply, as if a fist had closed around my heart. A wave of dizziness washed over me, blurring the room's edges. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, the cold hardwood pressing against my palms. I heard my own breath rasping in my ears, thin and broken. My vision dimmed for a moment. I could not move. Footsteps approached, and for a fleeting second, hope fluttered inside me. Patrick. I recognized the sound of his shoes. He stepped into the doorway, looking down at me with a face pale and torn. "Mom," he whispered, but the word held no strength, no direction. "Patrick, I tried to say, but my voice barely escaped my mouth. I reached a hand toward him, not for rescue but simply to feel something other than the cold floor beneath me. He flinched, actually flinched. Then he turned to Marissa, as if silently asking what he should do, as if she were the authority on the matter. She folded her arms and raised her eyebrows, and whatever courage he might have gathered drained out of him like water from a broken cup. I have a conference call," he murmured, and without looking at me again, he stepped back into the hallway and walked away. Walked away from his own mother, lying on the floor. A hollow sound escaped my throat, part grief, part disbelief. I had known his silence was dangerous, but I had not imagined it would look like this, his back retreating down the hall, while I lay crumpled, trying to breathe past the pain. Marissa crouched in front of me then, her expression smooth and icy. "You can get up on your own," she said. "I am not touching you. I do not touch trash." Her words were deliberate, each one sharpened like a blade that had been waiting for the right moment to strike. She stood and brushed imaginary dust from her hands, satisfied with the scene she had created. "You are dramatic," she added. "Get up before you stain the floor." For a moment, I stayed exactly where I was, not because I could not move, but because I wanted to understand this moment fully, to let the truth sink deep enough that I would never question it again. Patrick was gone. Marissa was cruel beyond measure. There was nothing left to salvage here. I forced myself upright slowly, gripping the edge of the bed frame, pushing through the pain that spread through my chest like a slow fire. My breath was shallow, but I steadied it. I had survived grief before. I could survive this too. When I finally stood, I reached for the small flip phone on my nightstand. It was outdated, scratched, and simple perfect for someone who no longer expected the world to care. My fingers trembled as I opened it, but not from weakness. This time the trembling came from something else. Resolve. I scrolled through the contacts until I found the name I had kept hidden for years. The name of the only person who had never treated me as a burden. Elodie Mercer, emergency. I pressed the call button. The line rang once, then twice. When the call connected, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "Elodie," I whispered, my voice thin but steady. "I need you." When Elodie answered the phone that night, her voice carried the kind of steady calm that had always made me feel as though the world had not entirely forgotten me. "Agatha," she said softly, "tell me what happened." I could not bring myself to repeat every detail. My chest still hurt. My breathing still felt shallow. So I told her the truth in pieces, enough for her to understand what I had finally accepted. "I cannot stay here anymore," I whispered. "Not another night." There was a pause, but it was not the kind that came from hesitation. It was the stillness that precedes movement, like the quiet intake of breath before a leap. "I am coming tomorrow," she said. "First thing in the morning. And I am not coming alone." When the call ended, I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone resting in my lap. I stared at my hands, trembling but determined. I had kept so many secrets all these years, secrets meant to protect others. But it was my turn now to be protected. I just did not realize how much Elodie already knew. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in pale stripes. I heard Marissa's voice downstairs, sharp and irritated, as she spoke on the phone. Patrick had already left for work. The house was too quiet, except for her wandering rage. I wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. It felt strange to wait for someone who had once been a small girl clutching my hand, someone I had helped raise in the shadows, someone who saw me as more than the fragile old woman Marissa believed I was. The knock on the door came promptly at 9. Marissa opened it, expecting a delivery. Instead, she froze. Elodie Mercer stepped inside with the poise of a woman who had spent years in courtrooms. She wore a dark slate suit, her hair neatly pinned back, her eyes clear with purpose. She looked nothing like the 8-year-old who lost her mother or the teenager I quietly funded through school. She stood tall now, formed from grief, perseverance, and the guidance I never admitted giving. "Who are you?" Marissa demanded, her voice already rising. Elodie did not answer her. She walked straight toward me, and when she reached me, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am better now," I said. Marissa scoffed. "You cannot just walk into my house." Elodie turned then, slowly, her gaze cool and unafraid. "This is not your house," she replied. "It is not even Patrick's. It is legally owned by Agatha Merrill, every inch of it." Marissa blinked rapidly, confusion warring with disbelief. "That is impossible," Patrick told me. "Patrick assumed," Elodie cut in. "But assumptions do not hold up in court." Marissa's face began to pale. She opened her mouth again, but Elodie was already pulling documents from a slim leather folder. Deeds, ownership records, tax statements, all bearing the name Agatha Merrill. My name. I had known the house was still mine, but seeing the papers spread across the table, now seeing Marissa's face drain of color, felt like a truth finally reclaiming its place in the world. Marissa tried to recover. "You cannot prove anything else. You cannot just accuse us of something." Elodie raised a brow, a movement so subtle and powerful that even I felt its weight. "I did not come here with accusations," she said. "I came with evidence." She stepped to the far wall and reached behind the family photo frame that hung crooked near the staircase. She removed a small black device and placed it on the table. A camera. My breath caught in my chest. I had never noticed it before. "Before you panic," Elodie said, "this camera is legally installed. It is in a shared common area and was placed with the homeowner's full consent." She looked directly at me. "Your consent." I nodded weakly. I had not understood the full purpose at the time, but I trusted her. I always trusted her. Elodie tapped the device. "This has recorded enough to make the situation very clear to the authorities. Physical endangerment, verbal harassment, financial manipulation, elder neglect," she paused, "and attempted fraud." Marissa's breath hitched. "Fraud? What fraud?" Elodie opened the folder again and slid forward a printed screenshot, an online form with my forged signature. The same form Marissa had tried to use to transfer financial control. "You left it open on your laptop," Elodie said. "You must be more careful with your crimes." The color drained from Marissa's face completely. She swayed, gripping the table as if the floor had tilted. I watched her, not with triumph, but with the weary understanding of someone who had finally seen the truth step into the light. "Elodie," I whispered, my voice trembling with gratitude and fear, "what happens now?" She looked at me, softening only for me, and said, "Tomorrow, I will come back with everything we need, and I will bring witnesses. You will not go through this alone." Then she turned to Marissa, her expression steel once more. "Tomorrow," she repeated, "I will bring evidence and consequences." Marissa stood frozen, her fingers gripping the counter until her knuckles turned white. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. For the first time, she was the one who could not speak. And for the first time, I felt something bloom quietly in my chest. Hope. When Elodie headed for the door, she said one last thing, clear and steady. "I will be here in the morning, and I will bring the truth with me." I saw Marissa's face collapse into terror. She understood. Her reign in this house had just begun to crack. Elodie came back early the next morning, exactly as she promised, but she did not come quietly. She carried with her the kind of calm intensity that belongs to people who have already seen the worst and learned how to rise above it. Her charcoal suit was immaculate, her steps sharp, her eyes bright with a clarity that cut through the air like cold wind. I had seen her confident before, but never like this. Today, she was a force. Marissa hurried toward her, the panic still fresh in her eyes. She attempted a smile, thin and quivering. "Elodie, about yesterday." Elodie walked past her without a pause. "Do not speak to me," she said, "and do not attempt to rewrite your behavior. It will not work." Marissa stopped mid-stride, frozen as though someone had switched off her spine. Elodie reached the living room and set her leather case on the table. When she turned, her gaze was winter-sharp. "And for the record," she added, "I do not shake hands with anyone who abuses my grandmother." Marissa's breath hitched. Patrick, who had just stepped into the doorway, looked like someone had slapped him with ice. "She is your what?" he whispered. "My grandmother," Elodie repeated, her voice steady as steel. She opened her laptop and connected it to the discreet device she had retrieved yesterday. "Sit," she commanded, not loudly, but firmly enough that both Patrick and Marissa instinctively obeyed. She tapped a key. The first video appeared. There I was, curled under 2 thin blankets on the living room couch. The thermostat clicked off moments later as Marissa walked into frame, smirked at the wall, and left without a word. The cruel satisfaction on her face was impossible to misread. Patrick gripped the couch so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Marissa, what did you do?" The next video played before she could answer. The staircase, the towel, my slipper sliding, my hand clutching the railing, my breath breaking as I barely caught myself. Marissa's voice came from off-screen, irritated, not concerned. "That was an accident," Marissa blurted out desperately. "She leaves things everywhere. I did not." Click. Now the live stream played, her voice louder and uglier than I remembered. "A burden. A relic. Trash that breathes." Patrick sank lower on the couch. His face had drained of color, but the shock on it was deeper this time, not just horror at her actions, but dawning awareness of what his silence had enabled. He looked like a man finally realizing the ground under him had been quicksand all along. Elodie clicked again. Now a screenshot appeared, the fraudulent document. My signature forged with jagged strokes, the date incorrectly filled, every detail sloppy enough to be incriminating but malicious enough to show intent. Marissa swayed and stumbled, dropping to the carpet like her legs refused to hold her. "Please, Elodie, please. I was overwhelmed. I did not mean harm. Please, You tried to steal her home. You targeted an elderly woman. You manipulated her medication. You endangered her life." Elodie's voice never rose, yet the weight of each word pressed the air flat. "You acted because you assumed no one cared enough to stop you." She picked up her phone, but this time, before dialing, she spoke loud enough for the room to hear. "I already briefed the legal and protective teams last night. They were prepared to arrive this morning." Then she made 3 calls, short, precise. Minutes later, the front door opened. Martin Beck, Caleb Foster, Noah Riddell, 3 attorneys with reputations as sharp as the suits they wore. Behind them, Megan Hollis and Carla Remington, social workers whose steady eyes scanned the room, assessing, documenting. And finally, Officers Grant Lewis and Dana Whitlock stepped inside with the measured calm of professionals who have seen cruelty and know exactly how to handle it. Marissa's face collapsed. Why are they here? Why are there police? Why are there lawyers? Martin Beck opened a folder. "Mrs. Keaton, the evidence collected constitutes elder abuse under state law. That includes neglect, deliberate endangerment, psychological torment, financial manipulation, and attempted fraud." Caleb Foster added, "The court does not take lightly to endangering a vulnerable adult." Elodie turned toward Patrick. Her voice sharpened, and as the primary adult resident in this home, Patrick Harwood will also undergo inquiry regarding his complicity through prolonged silence. Patrick's face crumpled. He pressed a hand over his mouth as if finally understanding the cost of doing nothing. Officer Dana Whitlock stepped forward. "Mrs. Keaton, we will need you to stay seated while we take statements." Marissa let out a broken, animal-like sound. She reached toward Patrick, who did not move. He looked hollow, shaken to the core, but inert. No defense left, no excuses. I watched quietly, hands folded in my lap. I did not feel triumph. I felt something deeper, a steady, grounded stillness. The kind that comes when the truth finally arrives after months spent waiting in the dark. Justice does not have to shout. It simply has to step into the room. And now it had. Standing on its own 2 feet. Clear, unshakable, undeniable. The living room was so silent after the officers finished their initial questioning that I could almost hear my own heartbeat returning to its natural rhythm. For the first time in months, the air in the house felt breathable, not warm yet, but no longer poisoned. Elodie stood beside me, her arms crossed, her presence steady and unshakable. Marissa knelt on the carpet, trembling, her face blotched from crying, her mascara smeared into black streaks across her cheeks. It was then that Elodie opened her case once more and removed a thick envelope sealed with the emblem of her law firm. She placed it on the coffee table gently, almost ceremonially, then slid it forward with 2 fingers. "This," she said, "is the legal notice of property retrieval." Marissa's eyes widened. "Property retrieval?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "What are you talking about?" Elodie's tone did not soften. "This house does not belong to you. It never did. And after the documented abuse, the forged documents, and the danger you posed to a vulnerable adult, you are required to vacate the premises within 21 days. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. "You cannot be serious," she gasped. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That," Elodie replied, "is not Agatha's concern." She turned another page in the documents and continued. "Additionally, you are forbidden from coming within 100 yards of Agatha Merrill. Violating that order will result in immediate arrest." The words seemed to physically hit Marissa. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as if she had been punched. "Patrick," she sobbed, looking at him desperately. "Say something, do something. This is your home. Your mother is taking everything from us." Patrick sat frozen on the couch, the color of ashes. "Marissa," he murmured, "I did not know. I did not know it was this bad." Elodie's gaze snapped toward him. "Ignorance," she said sharply, "is not a defense. Your silence made all of this possible." He shut his mouth again, the weight of those words sinking into him like stones dropped into water. Marissa's world began collapsing by the hour. While the officers and social workers completed their assessments, her phone buzzed with message after message. First, an email from the hospital administration, then another, and then a final, short text. Elodie glanced at her. "You should read them." Marissa's hands shook as she opened her phone. A strangled sound escaped her throat. "They terminated me," she whispered. "Effective immediately. They said the video, the footage." Her voice cracked. "They said it violates the ethical code. They said I am unsafe around patients." Her sobbing became louder, more frantic. She dropped the phone, and it clattered loudly on the hardwood floor. "My career," she cried. "My job. Everything I built." "You built nothing," Elodie replied calmly. "You climbed on the backs of people you believed weaker than you. You chose cruelty. This is the result." Then the messages kept coming. A voicemail from her sister, one from her aunt. Both harsh, both cutting, both saying the same thing in different ways. "Do not call us. Do not come to us. We do not want to be associated with you." Her face went white, then red, then a sickly shade of gray. She looked at me, desperate, as though I might save her from the consequences she had chosen. But I had no words left for her. Not hatred, not forgiveness, nothing. And then the final blow came. Another notification appeared, a court summons, from a creditor. Elodie did not need to read it. "The money you borrowed under false statements," she said. "The debt you hid from Patrick, the one you secured using falsified documents, it is all coming due now. Your lender has filed a lawsuit. You will have to answer for it." Marissa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Officer Grant Lewis stepped forward. "Mrs. Keaton, please stand. We will escort you outside for transport to the station for formal processing." Marissa stared at him as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "You are arresting me? Right now?" He nodded. "You are being taken in for questioning and procedural holding. You are not being charged at this moment, but you are being detained as part of the ongoing investigation." Patrick finally rose, not to defend Marissa, not to beg, but to step aside as officers led her out. Neighbors gathered, whispering as curtains shifted. When they placed her in the patrol car, her screams tore through the street, raw and frantic, yet no one reached for her. Her world, built on cruelty, was collapsing exactly as she had shaped it. I watched without triumph, only relief like a tightly knotted cord finally loosening. Marissa was gone, and the house felt safe again. I left the house at dawn 3 days after the officers took Marissa away. The sky was still dim, carrying that pale blue shade that appears just before the sun decides to rise. Elodie arrived early with her car already packed, and I carried nothing with me except a small suitcase and the courage I had spent months searching for. I did not look back at the porch, the windows, or the garden Patrick once promised to plant for me but never did. That house had become a museum of every bruise that never showed on my skin, and I felt no need to honor it with a final glance. Elodie opened the passenger door for me. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply, and I was. The drive to the coast took a little over 2 hours. The landscape shifted slowly, from quiet neighborhoods to open roads, from gray pavement to small glimpses of ocean peeking between the hills. I watched the scenery without speaking, letting the hum of the engine and the rhythmic rolling of the tires settle the last fragments of tension still clinging to my bones. When we finally arrived, the house stood exactly as I remembered it from the old photographs Elodie once sent me. A small, weathered cottage with white trim and blue shutters, just a few steps from the shore. It had once belonged to Delilah's aunt, then stood empty for years before Elodie restored it. She told me once, long ago, that she hoped to bring me there one day, when life allows it. I never imagined life would choose such a strange and painful path to make that possible. Elodie carried my bag inside while I stood at the doorway, breathing in the scent of salt and sun. It felt unfamiliar and familiar all at once, like stepping into a dream I had forgotten belonged to me. The living room was warm and simple, painted in soft tones, with a knitted blanket draped over the couch and a shelf of novels near the window. There was no chaos here, no shadows in the corners, no whispered cruelty waiting behind the walls. "This is your home now," Elodie said as she returned to my side. "No rushing, no fear, no walking on eggshells, just peace." Peace. It had been so long since I had tasted that word without bitterness. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning I woke to the hush of waves breathing against the shore, opened the windows, brewed coffee, and watched gulls drift above the water while my hands warmed around the cup. In the afternoons, I knitted soft sweaters and scarves for the town shelter, finding comfort in the quiet usefulness of each stitch. Evenings were spent reading old journals, rediscovering memories I had tucked away, sometimes hearing Delilah Vance's laughter echo with the waves. Living in a place she once loved made her feel close again. One sunset, as the sky burned gold, a knock came at the door. I already knew who it was. Patrick stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes red, carrying the weight of guilt that had come far too late. "Mom," he said finally, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." Tears filled his eyes, spilling over before he could wipe them away. "You did nothing to deserve what she did, or what I let happen. I failed you." I felt the old ache in my chest rise, not from pain but from memory of the boy he once was, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, who once kissed my cheek with love instead of shame. But some distances cannot be closed with apologies. "Patrick," I said gently, "when I needed you, you were silent." He nodded, sobbing now. "And now," I continued, my voice soft but steady, "I choose silence too. Not out of cruelty, not out of anger, but because peace sometimes requires closing the door gently, even on the people you once loved without question." He bowed his head, accepting the truth, then whispered a broken goodbye before walking away down the path. When the door closed, I walked to the porch and looked out at the sea. The waves glimmered under the fading light, each one arriving and departing with quiet certainty. "They called me useless," I murmured to myself. But the useless one walked away. I breathed in the salted air, the last light touching my face, and left them with the weight of their own cruelty. And that, my dear listeners, is how one quiet old woman finally stepped out of the shadows she never deserved to live in. Life has a way of testing the gentle ones the hardest, but it also has a way of returning peace to those who never stopped carrying kindness in their palms. If my story reached you, if you felt even a heartbeat of my fear, my strength, or my freedom, if somewhere inside you, a small voice whispered, "I needed to hear this today," then I want to thank you for staying with me until this moment. These stories, the true stories, from the quietest corners of our lives, deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered. And they deserve a home where honesty is safe and wisdom is welcome. So, before you go, I hope you will stay close to this little corner we have built together. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where we speak softly, but the truth echoes loud. Your presence here means more than you know, and I will be right here, waiting to tell you the next story that refuses to stay buried. Until then, take care of yourself and listen closely to the quiet people in your life. They often carry the biggest truths of all.